You're listening to Till the Bottom. For better or for worse, everything is fascinating if you dig deep enough. If you agree with this, then this podcast might be right for you. Let's start talking.
But before going ahead with this episode, we feel that a couple of remarks are warranted, especially because when dealing with a topic as complex as immigration, a little bit of extra nuance is never really unwelcome. The first one is a clarification about the content. At some point during the episode, we discussed the so-called open border policy encouraged by Angela Merkel in 2015 in the face of the Syrian conflict. The policy was officially targeted exclusively to those with a quote-unquote rightful asylum claim. That is, those people fleeing a tangible threat to their lives. On the ground, however, the vetting process might not have been always that strict. We feel that this clarification was not conveyed during the episode. The second is an issue that probably should go without saying, but in any case, it is better to state it explicitly. The views of our guests belong exclusively to them and do not necessarily represent or align with our own. If not every single disagreement is challenged, that is mostly due to the lack of time, the prioritization of a different conversational route, or simply because a counter-argument did not occur to us at the time. With those caveats in place, it is time to start talking.
And welcome to another episode of Till the Bottom. We are your hosts, Mitra and Nacho, and we have again, as a guest here, Quasi Dr. Nakul. Okay, first, before starting and before talking about the conversation that we will have today, just a little bit of some remarks. If you remember, we left last episode promising that we would be back. We were just going to make a break, and we were coming back to talk about with the second part of our conversation. And in principle, that was the intention. We started recording the episode. We had some technical problems. Let's just say that we do have some material. Possibly in the future we might release that, but we came to the conclusion, to the agreement that it might be better just to start anew, to start afresh, and just give you the second part of the conversation now. The topic for today, it's going to be centered, or we expect it to be centered around culture in the context of immigration. And I said we hope to stick to that narrative because last time that we attempted to talk about this, we ended up talking about the philosophy and the moral issues with killing
animals
cows.
and cows.
Anyway, if we happen to go into another tangent, if it happens to be fruitful, then we might pursue it, and we can always come back and have another. Invite Nakul once again to join us here.
I'm always free, all evenings, especially on Tuesday when I do yoga.
Perfect. Okay, good. So I think it might be important to start this episode with a little bit of definitions, because we will be talking a lot about culture and cultural things, and I'm under the impression that culture and cultural are those kind of words that get thrown around very easily, and people just kind of swallow them whole, never kind of dissecting what their contents are. So I think it's important to kind of start on a solid ground and try to more or less define what we mean by culture and cultural. So I would like one of you to
Give it a shot.
Yeah, I guess I should start this discussion, or rather the definition of culture, because I hate to disappoint you, but my definition is going to be exactly not what you want to hear.
Oh boy, okay, yeah. I'm ready.
We are getting into a tangent already.
Now, my definition of culture is everything. Everything. Every idea that you have, every reaction to any stimuli that you have, every cell of your body, all that is your culture.
We are getting into a tangent. Yeah.
But I understand why one has to have an understanding of culture, at least to begin a discussion, or a broad consensus on what parts of culture we are talking about while beginning a discussion, which we are doing now, and to end it too. But I consider things like culture, philosophy, religion, all these definitions, I think they are very academic. And when you're discussing specific issues or specific ideas, then these definitions serve the purpose of just starting the discussion. When you get into the meat of the discussion, then you are focusing on elements which are very specific. So just like when people say I'm a right winger or left winger, in itself it doesn't have any meaning, and we all know that it doesn't say anything about a person per se, but it helps to give an overview or to...
If you have an idea about the cultural context, then it means something, right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Would you like to say something about this introductory
but this is as vague as it can get, right?
Yeah. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but that's the definition.
But it comes out of something? Like a social...
from an established theory or from an established thought.
So the culture comes out of that.
Oh, I thought you
No. I'm not talking about where your opinion on culture comes from, or what you think culture
itself
is.
What culture itself comes from.
Yes. What does it? How does it arise? Like, it has to have some sort of a geographical boundaries, which a set of people living together in a certain.
No, but if you say that culture is everything,
even the cells of your body.
Even the cells of your
like
body.
When I look at you, I can tell you are a Bengali. I don't even need to speak with you to tell that you are a Bengali.
But you already made that geographical boundary.
Yeah.
Where did that arise from?
From the way you look. So now I'm making a judgment based on how you look, which is on every particle of cell that is on your body, your eyes, your ear, your skin, everything.
Doesn't that make things unnecessarily complicated? I mean, I think if you want to have a word that has an operational virtue to it, you need to circumscribe it a bit more.
Yeah.
First of all, I mean that would be my first disagreement with your definition, just on purely practical grounds, right? If you're going to say this word, for instance, culture or art, or are going to be so expansive so as to include even every cell on your body, I think that makes it essentially impossible to have a conversation about culture, because we would need all the time in the universe to even start to talk about or to narrow it down to whatever topic is.
So culture is something like, when you talk about culture, you're talking about human culture, or you won't even make that distinction?
No, yes, then that's the thing. I completely get your point that.
So that's my disagreement on practical terms. I have other disagreement on other lines, but
I can respond to the practical disagreement on the definition itself. That I get that when you are trying to define a concept, you basically define it so that you can operationalize it. Like, we work with resilience as a term, and the first thing that we do as researchers is to operationalize the term to exactly point out what are the constituents or the components of that term. But some things like culture, if you end up operationalizing it to a smaller sphere, then you risk keeping out so many things that it then ceases to be the concept that it used to be. For example, if you say the culture is just the human culture, the culture that is developed through social dynamics, then you leave out many things like race or gender.
But you can have other terms to include those things. For instance, I would make a distinction between something that you would say is cultural and something that stems from universal human nature. That it's when you have a certain feature of behavior or a certain practice that is present in every culture throughout the world, wherever you have humans, for instance, like religious practices, every culture that has ever been analyzed by every anthropologist happens to have some sort of cult or religious superstitious set of beliefs. So that's a cultural universal. what that is telling you, and this happens with many. There are extensive lists of cultural universals. I think there was a guy, Donald Brown, that made a list of around 1,000, and it includes very specific things like ornamentation,
liking sweet stuff.
Yeah, liking sweet stuff, age statuses, all sorts of things. And when you have these features that are universal, I think it's better to think about those things in terms of a universal human nature, something that has to do with our biology. And usually when people talk about culture, they leave out those characteristics that are explainable on biological grounds.
Okay.
I mean, that's why I thought it's important to. Yeah. No, it's proven to be the
because
case.
I guess when you asked this question, you were more about trying to point it out that a lot of time people refer to culture, they narrow the boundary to something very restrictive,
and it's
you
useful.
went it to an absolutely different level. So you have to define spheres of culture.
So now what is happening is we are having a particular discussion, and that discussion will inform what our definition of culture is. So,
but when you put it like that, to my ears, it sounds like it is a hopeless enterprise to even try to define culture, because you will always leave something out. And yeah, I agree with that, but that doesn't make it seem hopeless. From my point of view, you can perfectly well reach a reasonable compromise of things that probably a slightly more expansive definition of culture would include, but for the purpose of a conversation, it's really, they are not essential, and you can just leave them out.
Yeah. Yes. So for the purpose of conversation,
what would you say?
For every conversation, then it would be imminent on us to first define what the culture is, which we can very well do today. Mm-hmm. But I just wanted to put this idea out that your definition of culture depends on the type of conversation that you are having. And for example, if someone is conversing about bacteria, then bacteria also comes out of a culture.
Yeah, but so, that's really...
And when we grow a lot of bacteria, it's a cell culture.
Those are homonyms, right? Use the same word used to completely different purposes.
Yeah.
You, Mitra, would you like to more or less define what... I mean, I haven't given my definition that I think it's reasonable.
And just let me say that I think your definition will be pretty good for this conversation. Mm-hmm. But I just wanted to give this broad definition. I just wanted to put it out so that we come to this point where we realize that having a definition of culture before every conversation, which has to do with culture, is important. I mean, every conversation will have to define culture as it.
Okay, and I find this very interesting. We could actually talk about this for a long time.
No, but there's a point to that also. Like in principle, like for instance, if we say talk about a culture in a certain geographical location, you can go down in narrower and narrower spheres depending on what you're trying to channel into. Mm-hmm. Like for instance, with Indians, you can say Indian culture, but you can narrow it down to say North Indian culture. You can narrow it down further to a certain set of languages, if language is the root of how you're defining cultures. Similarly, with you can do that with clothes, with respect to the religion, with respect to... So that's where I guess that's your point. Like depending on which way you're looking at it, you can also have completely different set of fears.
And in the end, I don't see much of a value in being very strict about defining a culture, because in the end, we are not going to judge the culture. We are going to judge particular, or rather not judge, but we are going to talk about particular aspects, very specific things. Mm-hmm. And that makes the entire exercise of discussing the definition of culture a very academic exercise. No. It doesn't have a very real world implication. I mean,
no. Let me advance a definition that I think it would. I would imagine is flexible enough and expansive enough to include all these particularities that we will touch upon later. So culture, I would say, is the group or the set of values, rituals, tradition, language, religion, what else is there? Even food, customs that are transmitted intergenerationally in a certain group, in a certain population. And I think if you treat culture as more or less something like that, it can accommodate every kind of particular quirks that particular cultures might have that we will be talking about later. So, would you agree or disagree?
Yeah.
That's
I think that was, especially the intergenerational transfer part, that was
it's an intentional transfer, right? It doesn't happen by chance. It's not the same as genetic transfer in the sense that there's this factor of randomness. It's intentional in the sense that the older generation instructs the younger generation into all of these set of practices, and there's a period of acculturation that happens basically since the moment you're born in a certain place, and so the society around you, your family core, is going constantly to try to inculcate those cultural values on you from the very beginning. In that sense, it's a kind of like it's an intentional transference of rituals, values, morality, food, ways of dressing, religion,
and that's
language.
But then the point is that every person will have evolve a new set of culture, right? And his own definition of culture.
But then elements of it can be shared with a group.
But you wouldn't. I don't think you would include those. How would you call them? Acts of personal revelry against the culture you were born into as part of the culture. I wouldn't say that. And you can also think about the notion of counterculture. Every culture contains within itself a certain fraction of the population that will be kind of reactionary towards the instituted
orthodoxy versus heterodoxy.
Yeah, there's like an internal struggle always in every culture. Cultures are not perfect in the sense that they don't produce the maximum level of satisfaction in all of the individuals that happen to be within that culture. There's always going to be some level of dissatisfaction. And if the levels of dissatisfaction rise very high, then that opens the door for counterculture movements within a certain culture that are kind of like revolutionary forces that will try to break the established schemes of that particular culture and either do away with them entirely or modify them to some degree so as to accommodate a higher level of satisfaction.
And that happens whenever a particular culture lasts for a very long time. Some imperfections creep in or expose themselves, and then you always have this counterculture, which is referred to as heterodoxy. So you have the orthodoxy, which is the prevalent culture, and the counterculture, which is the heterodoxy. So, for example, in the Indian scenario, Hinduism or schools of Hinduism like Samkhya, Vedanta, Mimamsa, they would be the orthodox ones, and schools of Hinduism like Charvak or
Jainism, Buddhism.
Yeah, Jainism, Buddhism, they would be the heterodox schools.
Yeah, but then of course, like you can also define culture in terms of the Brahmin culture or the Shudra culture, because they have a completely different set of lifestyle. So of course you can just find different layers in every respect.
Yeah, but
so even when we are criticizing parts of Indian culture, so it is on a basis of some notion which you won't have that same discussion with someone in Germany about.
But again, coming back to the point which he mentioned earlier, he said that every person has his or her own culture. Yeah. But again, in this, that culture, parts of it could be shared with a community. And then you have the communal culture, which shares certain sections of a culture.
But personal,
amongst themselves.
The idea of personal culture,
how will you say, how will you define your culture? I think people like us, we come from cultural confusion.
Yeah, but this is
often over.
I mean, my issue with that is just mostly a matter of semantics and kind of trying to stick to terms as understood by.
But then you have to go to specifics. Like, I think it's very difficult to talk about culture. Maybe talking about religion is easy, or a geographical location is easier.
Here the thing is, personal culture, that concept might be interesting on its own, but it doesn't really ring a bell in me. Like, I understand the term culture as a property of a group of people, not so much a property of an individual.
So rather you could say it's the property of an individual which a group of individuals share. So one person is subscribing to, say, a particular style of dressing, and that's his culture, and apparently 100 people who live in his same locality also dress the same way. So it is their individual culture as well as the culture of a group of individuals who cohabit a particular space.
See, this is where it gets tricky, right? Like you can also say that we are all football fanatics coming from completely different geographical locations. Yeah. You have your own kind of culture in that sense.
Yeah, because you can...
So you have this culture in common, the football
I mean, you can understand
the idea. It just gets difficult then.
No, but then there's a little bit, but I think it's not so easy, so difficult to resolve, because you can just accept the idea that there are cultures within cultures, right? I mean, in every, for instance, metropolitan, cosmopolitan area, you will have subcultures, and not necessarily dividing themselves up among ethnic lines or nationalities. But for instance, the metalheads, no, the people that are very much into thrash metal, very hardcore rock music, and they do have like their own group of people that like to carry on certain activities. For instance, they usually happen to coincide with people that like to play role games, like, you know, these board games and play role games, RPG, like Dungeons and Dragons and so on. And they have like this subculture there. Then
which we would refer to as a cultish behavior. I think it's very easy to define cultures, or not easy. Like if we could see things as discrete modules, like if we were all living in tribes, which was very minimal flow between them, then it would have been much simpler to describe, because there's a sustainment of the same set of values and the way you perceive.
And for operational purposes, usually these kind of groups within groups are referred to as subcultures, and I think that term basically does the function of circumscribing this.
No, again, it's the same as in systems theory. You have systems, and you say systems are made of subsystems, and subsystems are made of components. Now, every subsystem can be broken down into further subsystems. So, in the end, you can get to a point where there are no components, there are just subsystems. So, you can go on from culture to subculture to further subculture ad infinitum. Okay. And that's why I would say that the discussion of what comprises culture is an academic discussion. Just consider what we are doing now. We are throwing examples, right? And that's what is eventually going to happen. When you get to the meat of the discussion, you are going to speak about specifics. And then whatever you decided culture is, however right it may be, doesn't matter. Because in the end you discuss specific issues or topics.
Okay. But then let's agree, I hope let's agree, that the functional definition of culture that we will adopt for this discussion is going to be this set of practices, rituals, religion, language, food, cuisine, clothing, moral systems that are transmitted from one generation to the next intentionally, and that they happen to more or less respect boundaries, sometimes geographical boundaries, and there's a way to delineate these groups that are adept to a particular culture. So I think
we can of course take that definition completely, but I will grant you that we won't need it because we are going to discuss specifics. So it doesn't matter if we have defined it or not.
Probably.
In the end,
just to...
Yeah, but it is an interesting and a very fruitful academic discussion.
I think so. It just proved it to be right now. I didn't expect it actually, but good. All right. Now, I'm a little bit doubtful whether we go into specifics, more concrete examples, or why this topic is relevant for us and for the place in which we find ourselves, or going before into the notion of cultural distance or compatibility between different cultures, and now just to really put names into this kind of a more abstract discussion of cultures in general. Now they start talking about particular cultures that exist in the world, and we happen to cohabit with. So what do you think? Do you prefer to go into the concrete issue of cultural integration, cultural mixing here in Dresden, in Germany, and probably from there we eventually will kind of end up talking about the compatibility and that kind of stuff? Would that be a good strategy, a good pathway? Okay, so why this topic is very present here in Dresden? Why the topic of culture and immigration and cultural mixing?
I guess it's something that has become much part of the mainstream conversation since the last 3-4 years. Mm-hmm. Since the
2015, right? It was,
probably 2015.
Right.
And
why here? What's happening here?
Specifically Dresden, because there is what was the name of the institution?
Patriotische Europäer gegen Islamisierung des Abendlandes.
In English, please.
Patriotic Europeans against the Islamization of the West.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Or the Occident.
Some words to say about these guys?
Yeah, as we discussed in the previous sub-episode.
Attempt.
Yeah. Actually, after that, I went on the Wikipedia page of Pegida.
Okay.
And apparently, it was started by Lutz Bachmann
who himself was an immigrant in South Africa.
It was started by this guy because he witnessed a clash between PKK supporters and some, I think, Chechen Muslims.
Mm-hmm. The Kurdish.
The Kurdish against the Chechens.
Uh-huh.
And that triggered something in him that, okay, Islam is something that is infringing upon the free speech of people and the rights of people. And that's why it started. So apparently, the genesis was not as we thought it to be. It was not extreme right-wing. Apparently.
Yeah, but he must have started with a group of close acquaintances or friends.
Probably. No, it wasn't the right wing which already had that group. The right wing had their own thing going on.
Yeah.
As soon as Pegida came as a platform, they just joined in as one of the elements. Of course, there were a lot of more moderates also who joined into the Pegida movement, but it started because of...
It started on a very non-right-wingy grounds. It started on grounds which were, I would say, very much pro-liberalism, I would say.
I don't know.
Maybe maybe not the first, but the second.
Let's say that the foundational principles probably were not particularly right-wing, but the overarching narrative, I think, was more or less correct. That in the beginning, when they started manifesting themselves, the group or the group of people that attended these initially rather small rallies tended to be way more inclined to the right.
It resonated with the extreme right for sure.
Mm-hmm. In the beginning, it had more traction in that side of the political spectrum, and later on, as particularly the movement got catalyzed because of some events happening in Cologne.
Yeah.
No, I would say the genesis, I guess it was because of the insurgence of refugees to start with, then Cologne. I think they existed and they had quite a lot of impetus even before that.
Yeah, just not to get ahead of ourselves. So there's a conflict that everybody knows about in Middle East, particularly in Syria and Iraq.
And the Syrian war triggered a certain insurgence of refugees, which triggered the impetus to
mixed with the rising of ISIS.
Exactly.
And all this mass exodus of people of different backgrounds that happen to coexist in that region that were fleeing violence.
Exactly.
And there was
because there's a crisis, so often in history, as soon as there's a war or a crisis, a lot of countries do have a tendency to open borders.
It's a law, right? It's a part of the
Yes.
charter.
So there were some countries who chose to open their borders and some that didn't. And Germany was one of them which chose to open their borders.
entirely in the beginning.
Let's not say open their borders, because now we associate open borders with a very different concept, which is complete open borders. But Germany decided to, let's say, accept
Yes.
refugees.
Mm-hmm.
That would be
And it was a very public.
in the
And
beginning.
it was a very large number of people who suddenly got into Germany.
And then they opened the borders completely.
Yeah, because there was an announcement, a very public statement from Merkel, right?
Earlier it was accepting refugees, and then it became open borders policy, which was just come one, come all.
And then it got kind of out of control because there were people coming as legitimate refugees, meaning people that had all too reasonable, very real,
reasons to seek
very,
refuge.
very real threat of violence against their lives.
Refugees are people who are seeking refuge
Yeah.
from some sort of a
Because
crisis.
they were fearful for their lives with all the reasons in the world, right? They were find themselves somehow in the middle of a battlefield, and your first instinct, not only of these people, I think of every
Anyone, yeah.
human, is just I'm gonna get away from this place.
Maybe I won't completely subscribe to that. For some fight or flight, those are
Yeah,
two
so they are-
predominant instincts.
Sure, there's the option of fighting. Let's say,
Yeah.
But I'm very. I don't sympathize a lot with. There's a common argument that one hears more or less often, which says implies that if you are a male and you're young, basically you are in the condition of fighting for your country, and therefore, because you are in that condition, kind of your obligation was to stay there and fight. This is,
But
I don't know
there's
if
a
you've
certain
heard.
set of the population
I
who would
don't
probably
resonates
put
with
into
I don't see why. I mean, for instance, first of all, you need to be the kind of person that cares a lot about the country and land. If you don't happen to be that kind of person, if for instance your priority is your family or your own life, I don't see why anyone can tell you, country comes first or land comes
but
first.
you're assuming that all humans have the same
that's what I'm
platform to
saying.
start their thinking.
Actually,
but I
he's
agree,
not
I agree.
assuming. He's
I
not
agree.
assuming.
I agree.
Yeah,
There's-
exactly. So no, but you're saying this is illogical because this doesn't make sense for a large chunk of population.
I don't think it's illogical. I think it's illegitimate to use that as a blanket argument.
Sure,
Yeah.
but every
You cannot use it as a blanket argument, but at the same time you have to acknowledge that every human being has duties towards himself or herself, towards the family, towards the village or the city, towards the country and towards the world. And just ignoring the duty to a particular section, or rather a particular concentric circle of this hierarchy is immoral.
No, but there are some of those concerns that supersede others.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
you can make reasonable arguments why that's the case.
Like if there is a person whose entire family will be slaughtered,
I think
if he stays in
your
that
obligation
place.
comes first to your family or even to yourself over your country.
So there's the thing.
But you opened a different hole there, like on something being immoral or moral.
Yeah, that again we can discuss, of course. But what I just wanted to say is that, as you said, you cannot always say that, okay, this person has left, this person who is in complete perfect physical state has left his country and that is why he is wrong. You cannot say that, but you have to acknowledge that it is the duty of a person to protect his or her country, city, family and him or herself. And that just has to be factored in even while accepting refugees. So if you see that someone has just abandoned his family or who had the power to do something good, but he has abandoned it to take refuge, to just have a good life, then probably he shouldn't qualify as a refugee.
Yeah, but I think I don't agree with that, and I also have an issue with the definition of duty there, because the way you talk about it makes it's essentially as synonymous with an obligation that you cannot escape, as if by law, as if you are mandated do that, to get your arms and join the fight, because you have a duty, an obligation with your city, country, community of this, that is strong binding enough so as to even put your life on the line for that. I don't buy that. I understand.
No, I did not say that it has to be putting your life in danger. But I'm just saying that you have to factor all these things in before making judgment on whether a person has left a war zone on good grounds or bad grounds. Just consider everything. Consider also, I mean, you cannot just say that it's his decision to completely abandon his country.
No,
it's not his decision.
But I wouldn't say that. I would say if your life is at risk and the life of your family, that's reason enough.
Yeah, that is.
And then it's up to the kind of personality you are to choose what your decision you're making. Like if your life is at risk, you can choose to stay. You can choose to help from outside, choose to get masses from someplace, or you can choose to escape.
Yeah.
The way you are saying it, you are assuming so a certain section of the society is always going to come from this mindset. This is how it is supposed to be. These are the moral grounds. If you're a young man, you're supposed to fight. This is how during the
actually I would just like to say that I don't say that if you are a young man you have to fight. I'm saying it is your duty to fight, but it is also your duty to save your family, to save yourself.
Yes.
So there are these different duties which are...
and it comes in hierarchies.
And then, just for example, take the case of Yudhishthir in Mahabharata. Yeah. He is a character who always spoke the truth, very Kantian person. He was a king and he was supposed to lie on the battlefield to save his side. And he did lie. But there were why did he lie? He is supposed to be this Kantian person who never lies. But he did lie to save his side, and he's one of the heroes. He's one of the heroes. So this is just to dive on the point.
A certain value,
but there's something very important. There's a difference between the level of duty you have your community and the status that you occupy in that community, right?
Yeah.
If you happen to be the president of a country, you have forfeited part of a larger chunk of your personal liberties, because now you're committed to your country in a much larger measure than the average citizen, right? So kind of your tally of duties changes depending on which position you occupy. If you're a king, obviously you have to sacrifice more.
And your set of duties is going to vary in whichever part of the world you go to. They will have a different sense of duty to different things. And so if you are trying to draw a line, okay, this is the reasons why we can take someone as a refugee and these are the reasons not. That is your point of view coming from one part of one kind of thinking. You go to completely other part of the... So they can have a different set of rules that they define to get people in or not take people in.
Okay. Now, bringing things a little bit back. So open borders. So Merkel appears on TV and basically announces this policy of open borders that opens the door for refugees and non-refugees to flock into Germany. And then the thing gets more complicated because after that announcement is made, arguably most of the people that start arriving come from other parts of the world, for instance, prominently North Africa, right? There's a lot of people from North African countries that start coming into Germany. Some of them which can make a reasonable case that their lives is in danger. For instance, people coming from Libya, you might say that. But then you have people from Morocco, people from Tunisia, people from Eritrea, people
from West Africa.
All sorts of,
Even India,
Even
so that's the thing, right?
Pakistan,
India.
Refugees have been coming from all parts of the world for, not all parts of the world, in Germany over the years, because it's a better way of life.
Yeah, the point is that...
So that there was a trickle of people coming in. What this open border created is, now there was no reason to stop these people as well. Actually, a larger chunk of that population comes in.
Since 2000, since the early 2000s, it was not a trickle. It was a very steady flow.
But that flow, as soon as you open borders, that will escalate even more, right?
It did take
so you have a problem with that flow as well?
There was already a flow of illegal immigrants.
Yeah.
And which was quite substantial.
To happen. That is bound to happen when you have a country which is doing quite well.
Wealthy country.
And then you come from countries where economically you have a lot of struggle. So this is a natural sense of migration. This is how humans migrate in general. You go from a place of scarcity to a place where there is...
And even in places that you don't imagine. Like, for instance, I work in Poland and I was talking to a friend there, and he was talking to me about the very large influx of Ukrainian immigrants into Poland, because Poland is relatively wealthier than Ukraine. And
then in Belgium you have a lot of Polish people coming.
In fact, Poland took around 1 million refugees, Ukrainian refugees, during the Ukrainian crisis.
Yeah. So this is a universal phenomenon. Whatever you have,
just think about human migration.
But that doesn't mean
that
doesn't mean you condone illegal migration or illegal immigration.
But we'll get into that. We definitely. This is kind of the flesh.
Let's discuss why Merkel was wrong in opening the open borders.
But before I just want to say something, and then we can get into that, which is that even though lots of people started coming into Germany from some of the legitimate war refugees, some other more what you would call economic migrants, after the open border policy was initiated, still a very large fraction of the German population was of the minds of welcome refugees, welcome people. And then there was this event that kind of changed the tide in the minds of a lot of Germans.
Change the opinion of a certain mass of the certain parts, section of the mass.
Quickly, and
do
you want to talk about it?
The Cologne incident.
The Cologne incident. The New Year's Eve of 2016, when I think around 100 or maybe 1,000 girls got groped, and some of them got nearly raped.
Many.
But this event, it sounds like it was like almost programmed and planned. Like altogether they were groped.
I mean, there might have been an element of planning to it, as there is during these.
Could be, yes.
Riots, which we see in the Middle East, where during these riots, during these protests, people surround the girls and...
It did happen. Remember the Tahrir Square?
Yeah, they call it Taharush or something. But that's actually... That opened the eyes of the German populace to what might happen. But for me, that is not the biggest threat in a way.
No, but in terms of the sensibilities of a large fraction of the population, that kind of changed some minds, or made some people that were kind of dubious, I'm not sure, I'm pro or against. It tipped the balance towards the against, because this groping and harassment collective harassment that happened outside the cathedral in Cologne was perpetrated by a group of migrants. They were described as North Africans. They were, if they happen to be North Africans, which is what the reports usually say, then they are probably not even refugees. So
they are refugees.
Not in the lawful.
They're asylum seekers. Yes, not
asylum seekers. They are seeking
for
people
who are using a disaster as an opportunity.
But they are not. They don't qualify as refugees as somebody that comes from Syria, right? It's a different.
Not by definition.
Fine. So that changed the environment, and now it's much more polarized. And recent political developments in German elections, for instance, have kind of shown that that's the case, right? With the resurgence of a political party that is very, very right, which is the Alternative für Deutschland, which they are, unashamedly right-wing. And such a party, I would say that before, let's say a couple of 3-4 years ago, basically didn't stand a chance to get to appeal to a significant fraction.
It didn't stand a chance because there was no reason for it to exist.
And now it does.
Now there is a reason, and that is why it exists, to fulfill, or rather to fill the vacuum created by that reason.
But you wanted to say something.
Why did this start? Because of certain policies that Merkel took, certain policy decisions that she took. And one has to see why that decision is wrong. So it's, for me, opening borders, and forget that North Africans came or whoever came. Opening the borders to let in as many people as can in is inherently a wrong decision, or rather, let's say, an immoral decision on Merkel's part, because she has been given power by the people of Germany to protect, or rather to serve their interests. Now, by opening the borders, Merkel used those powers which were given to her for a specific task, that is to protect the interests of the German people, or rather to protect German society. She used those powers to do something which she thought might be benevolent, but those powers were not given to her for that. So basically, she is not being
but I think you
deontologist.
Okay. You can make a better kind of argument to say why that was wrong, and not necessarily base it on the fact that it's a representative government and she represents the interests of the people.
There are two arguments. Yes,
because it did seem at the time that the majority of Germans were kind of friendly towards that such a policy.
So you're against opening borders at any point in as a concept
of course.
all ever.
Of course, yeah. Open borders is.
So for instance, during Indian independence, the between East Pakistan and Pakistan and India, there were open borders.
No, they were not open borders.
So
those borders would not have accept. They were open because there was no other option. You couldn't patrol those borders.
Yes.
It was not a decision taken
out from a humanitarian ground. Would you accept people are getting completely killed in one part of society?
Will
you accept those people or not?
Of course,
if there is an absolute crisis somewhere,
totally.
If a certain demographic section of the population is being completely killed.
Now let's take the example.
I'm not talking in context to this.
In general.
Like opening borders is always a no-no.
I'll tell you what.
Even for a brief period of time of crisis.
There are two things here. First of all, I would hate to make any general statements like that, but I'll just point out the things that one has to consider. First thing that one has to consider is, yes, there is a crisis and people are in need, and you have to accept them. Yeah, that is the first thing.
Yes.
Now, in the case, let's say India-Pakistan partitions, there was a huge wave of people who wanted to come in and go out. And during this wave,
that was absolute chaos. There were no nations existing before that at all. Let's talk about, let's say, the Bangladesh war.
Yeah, the Bangladesh war. Yeah. So in this case, you open the borders, but to whom? You open the borders to Bangladeshi refugees.
And here I don't know. Here and when she meant open borders, she didn't care if it was
qualification. Or yeah, exactly. This was open borders. That was. This was.
But you would be okay with it if it was open borders for Syrians, for instance.
Now this is another issue. Yes, you have to, as a responsible nation who has certain power, the nation has to provide refugees to as many people as it can. It has to, again, their duties. First is the duty as a human or as a humanitarian entity to other humans who are suffering. The second duty is to its own citizens.
Yes.
The third duty is to the progeny of those citizens and of the refugees who might come in. So you have to factor all these three things before taking a decision.
So this is where I kind of disagree. I think in moments of crisis, all these duties, the concept of regular day-to-day life duties goes for a 6. For a period of time, like when there is a need for some resurgence to happen out of absolute humanitarian grounds.
I understand that, but the problem also here was a problem of handling.
By open borders, it's also about, of course, you scrutinize that they there has to be some.
Then that is not the open borders that we are talking about.
Sure.
So the open borders by Merkel was.
I also disagree with the open borders as in like opening it to everyone.
As done by Merkel.
Yes. But even if, say, there were 2 million people who are going to die due to war, I would open the border, even if for a brief period of time it is going to harm
if
the
people are dying
in that
and they need help
from humanitarian grounds.
And you should.
Yes. Yes, that's.
And that's where I guess like Merkel's party's opinions come from. But they got it all wrong, of course.
But again, now, as you say that Merkel did that and it was right because many Germans supported that.
No, I don't want to say that it was right. Actually, my opinion is that it wasn't. But
I know that. But at that point, it seemed right.
That you could make the argument. Somebody can come to you and say, if you're grounding your argument on the fact that she is there first and foremost to represent the interests of the German population, then somebody can come to you and say, but at the time. arguably, the majority of Germans were, let them in. So then that argument gets kind of weaker, right? So then you need to find another way to...
Yeah, there are two arguments, of course. This was the first deontological argument, but I would still say that it was against deontology, because just taking the opinions of Germans in consideration. Deontology is your duty is what you have to do. That is the moral thing to do, your duty. So her duty was towards German people. Now, I would still say that it doesn't matter if a majority of the Germans wanted complete open borders, because she has been given the power not just to execute the will of the German people, but to ensure their safety and their well-being. Yeah, and not
to
just
know better. Let's say
to know better.
But that's
and
again,
that's
again. I mean, here there's something I want to get across first and foremost. I'm very critical of the policy of open borders. Personally,
you're playing the devil's advocate.
I'm playing the devil's advocate. Okay. I won't even say very critical. I am critical about it. I have reasons for that. I don't know if today we have time to expand on those reasons or not. Eventually there will come the time. But the point is, if you were saying, sorry, I just lost my train of thought because I was trying to defend this position. You said that
I said that
she should know better, right?
Yeah.
That she should know better because she was also there to kind of look for the interest of the German population, and she has been vested with confidence from these people as their leader, and that she would take the right choice. And somebody might come to you and say, "Oh, but that's kind of anti-democratic, no?"
Yeah.
Right.
No.
I mean, somebody can come. Basically, what you're saying is that it's possible for people not to know what's best for them.
Yeah.
And as long as you know better than themselves, then you can choose what they should do or decide their circumstances.
And that is why you elect leaders.
Yes.
Yeah. And that is why not everything is a referendum. And that is why
that way nothing functions in a...
You cannot have a referendum on everything. People have elected you not just to take decisions like... Otherwise, there is no point of being a leader. You have to take decisions not on what is popular. No, you don't have to be a populist. Yeah, that's the point I'm getting at. Merkel tried to be a populist, and she did not have any skin in the game, and so that's why she could take this decision. And that is why I think there are two things. Let's take the two schools of philosophy. One is the Kantian school, the deontological school, and I think I just explained why that is wrong. And then, of course, with the utilitarian view, you can see that it has been a disaster. The decision.
We can explain why that's been a disaster.
Yeah. At least till now, you could say that it has been a disaster because there has been a lot of social tension in Germany.
Okay. Yes.
And there have been a lot of cases in Germany.
To put the setting, I will formulate this as a question.
Yeah.
From your point of view, what's the biggest issue that this very large-scale immigration has brought to the forefront in Germany, particularly? What's the main problem that you see with large-scale immigration particularly from people in general, and then if you want, particularly people coming from mostly Middle East, North Africa, and their particular culture? What's the main issue there? One
would assume that it's the events like what happened in Köln. But I think that is just an initial... that's just the optically more apparent problem.
Right?
Yeah, this is the flashy problem.
It's what makes the news, what makes the headline.
It just catches your eye more. But I wouldn't say that thanks. That's the main problem. The main problem is the values that European society has developed, which it is quite proud of, and rightfully so. Values like secularism, free speech, women's rights, and you're already starting to see the deterioration of these values. So secularism, it's under threat. Free speech is under threat. Free speech, the best example of free speech being under threat is the Netzgrund. I forgot the name, but it's the German internet law. And this law is completely horrible, dude. I'm telling you.
Is it like
it is a law against hate speech and hate speech.
Which didn't exist before?
No, the law against online hate speech and fake news. And yeah.
No, but these laws have only arisen now also because we are also playing this new field.
But I'll tell you why
the
this
internet
law
game is so new to us. What is right, what is wrong, we are also balancing it out.
And that's why having such a law is difficult and it's dangerous because you don't know.
This is the initial tool that someone has created, and they will when you have such a cultural change, and here by cultural change I mean the way we live life with respect to internet. So you have to the culture, the rest of the culture has to adapt to this way of life.
Exactly,
and that's why
legislation has to be the last step.
Yeah, the legislation
has to be the last step,
not like the first.
Legislation is
It's
a line on a line on a rock. What do we call it? Yeah, shram. And
so, what should be the first step?
I think the first, when you have to deal with these new cultural circumstances, or for instance, the issue of the internet and fake news, if somebody is to trespass some sort of boundary, the punishment, quote unquote, should come from the society, not by violent means, by some not censoring with the power of the law, but your peer group has to say, "Hey, what's wrong with you? I'm not going to give you a platform or something.
Actually,
I'm not going to give you a like."
So how I see it is, it's a new territory you are playing in. So you play the field, and different societies.
The first line of defense is a society.
Let me finish.
Okay.
So different groups will tackle the issue in different ways. And of course, Germany chooses to do it with legislation,
and
we have every right to criticize, and exactly what we are doing.
No,
I'm just giving you the reasoning behind that they are also playing the field, and this might be with ample criticism. This will go down, and something else will come in, and you kind of try to equilibrate the way.
You cannot. Law is a very final step.
Yes,
and you cannot make a law when it's a wrong law because.
It is a wrong law, for sure.
I'll tell you why it is wrong. I'll tell you why it is wrong, because they haven't defined what hate speech is. They haven't defined what fake news is.
There's so much room for interpretation.
And
it's like
any
laws.
Any lawyer will tell you that you cannot make a law with words that are not legally defined.
Yeah.
And last year I was at the talk by the German Minister for Justice and Consumer Rights, Heiko Maas, who made this law. And it was in German. My German is not that good. Fortunately, I had a German friend sitting next to me. And I got some of it, but I confirmed with her what I understood. And basically what he said, what hate speech is, he said that anything that you say online, but you're afraid of saying on the dinner table, is hate speech. Anything that you're free to say behind the wheel of the internet, behind the wheel of internet anonymity,
that is extremely restricted.
But
come on.
And really? I was shell shocked. I couldn't believe my ears. So I asked my friend, and she said that yes, that is what he said.
And what was the environment? Maybe people agreed for the most part.
That is the other shocking thing. I have been in 2 or 3 public discussions in Germany, which deal with such sensitive issues. So the first one was on free speech and Meinungsfreiheit and the difference between hate speech and free speech, the difference between this.
Okay.
And so there was this guy from Poland, left wing, very left wing, and what he said is that criticizing religion is also hate speech. And if anyone would have said that in India, he would have been...
Is that a law? Because then we will have to...
A lot of people will agree to that also.
No, of course not.
Okay.
You're crazy, dude. Come on, don't trigger me like that.
Is that a law here? Because we will have to remove some episodes then.
Yeah. And I mean, even in India, it would have been completely shot down by the public.
Criticizing your religion is hate speech. No, in India, people will not agree with
everyone you. Everyone criticizes every religion in India. Hindus, that it's the pastime of us Hindus to criticize our own religion.
It might just be a dangerous business sometimes.
Yeah. So, and I was surprised that not a single German, and it was filled with youths, German youth, our age younger. No one said anything about it. It was just I who raised a question, who asked him for a clarification on that, because I said that it is a set of ideas. How can you not criticize ideas? So it was just me and this other guy, Tudor, whom I later befriended, who was from Romania. So none of the Germans had anything to say about that. And even during this Heiko Maas speech, where he said this dreadful thing, there was only 4 or 5 German old or middle-aged German men who put on black masks on front of their face, went to the stage and held
What?
Maas ist Stasi.
Whoa.
Apart from that, the entire audience, which consisted again in this meeting, which was filled with young Germans
Young people.
from this Institute for Law, from this law institute which is near Alta. There are many from that institute, but no one said anything. And that shocks me because you expect the youth to be full of energy, to be rebellious, to question authority. And it did not happen.
Disconcerting also for me, I guess. I mean, I wasn't there, but I understand the feeling. I am also aware of a poll, I think it was, or a study done in first world countries, Britain, the USA, Finland, Sweden, Norway, Australia, etc., etc. And I think one of the question was how important or how essential is democracy? And the young people in all of there's a correlation between the richest the country is, the young people are inclined to say it's not really important. We can just do away with it for the most part. Like,
they take it for granted.
It's weird. It's strange. It's very dark and gloomy.
And now imagine such a culture which is kind of nihilistic. Yeah, I mean, not respecting democracy or not rooting for democracy, which has given you all these things, is kind of a nihilism, I would say. And take such a culture and put in a host of new people who are fundamentally opposed to the values that I earlier spoke about, free speech, women's rights.
Does that apply to this case of immigration from the Middle East and North Africa?
Yeah. And that's my biggest concern.
But what do you mean with there are nihilists?
So in principle, there are laws. So Pegida can exist because they're doing it up front. But if people are...
Pegida can exist because they are not violently attacking people for the most part. Obviously you will have these fringe elements, for sure. They do. There are neo-Nazis that are identified with Pegida, and they are very likely to engage in physical violent activities. And in that case, that...
Yeah, and then they will get imprisoned.
That's just wrong.
This network law is for online hate speech and this thing. So if you post a tweet or something, and if Facebook or Twitter doesn't delete it, they get fined 500 million euros, or something like that. 500.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's some amount of money.
I think 500. I think it's 500 million. And so imagine what is the effect of this on free speech. Won't Facebook or Twitter err on the side of caution to just
but
go on?
We can kind of breathe easy because that's not going to happen, right? This is just like a project.
No, it is happening. The law is in force. Since January. Yeah, in Germany.
It's part of a penal code. And
so
not a penal
what happens
code,
to this?
But the law is for Facebook and Twitter mostly. They will delete it.
We really need to start worrying then. I think we need to take down some videos.
No, it is in force, and as far as I know, the law is restricted to making these companies delete hate speech and all these things.
Okay, now let's hold that thought and connect it to the problem of migration. So you said that problems are very likely to arise when you have a culture, a host culture, that has come up with ideas like free speech and it faithfully enforces those ideas. And then you have an incoming culture that for the most part is, I don't know, I would not say for the most part, that there is a significant fraction of people from that other culture which are not that sympathetic to free speech or that are willing to supersede free speech when you cross certain boundaries. What happens when you mix these two things? Okay, just to be more specific because it sounds too abstract in general. But before that, I want to get something across, which is it's almost impossible to talk about these topics without feeling a little sense of trepidation and to you kind of observe your words carefully. At least I personally do.
Lest some people call you racist, Islamophobic.
I observe my
sexist.
words. I try to couch my comments. I try to. You feel the need of trying. You want to pour your brain out, put it on display, so everybody can see everything. The entirety of your thoughts. But because you have this one-dimensional way of communication, which is just a linear string of words at a time. And you are, like, wait, I have more to say. I have these nuances here in my opinion, and you feel this trepidation of, there's not enough time for you to say everything you have to say without the other person already labeling you before you finish. So
I completely agree. I completely understand your trepidation.
So I just want to say that first, because I'm going to say things that are delicate sometimes. Particularly here. So, we're talking about, I was saying before, people from the Middle East and North Africa. The salient feature there is that, for the most part, they are Muslims.
Yeah.
And that means that, obviously, they adhere to Islam. And Islam is one of the three Abrahamic religions that are, how to put it mildly.
Introducing Islam to the world.
Yeah, but they have a code of conduct, right?
It was the youngest of the religions.
Yeah, and they have a code of conduct. Actually, Judaism is very similar, very also intrusive, but it just so happened that
it has gone through the process.
Yeah,
and I think Christianity also went through that process. And you would hope
it's not that simple, because Christianity and Judaism do not claim to be the final word of God, and their prophet was not, let's say, as bad as Prophet Muhammad.
There are differences that make Islam a little bit more...
It's not just about the age. So when you said it's the youngest religion, something clicked in my mind. I got triggered of it, because that's not a good way of characterizing Islam. Just saying it's the youngest. Somehow you are trying to imply that with time it will heal itself, or rather it will go up.
I would like to see reforms, and this is what you would like to see.
Yeah.
Like,
you cannot
eliminate Islam completely.
No, what I'm saying is that
there is a process of reforms that significant reforms that happened in Christianity over the years, and two wars needed to happen to end a lot of worldviews that are notions that exist.
I get that, but the ease with which Christianity led those reforms happen, and it was not easy. It was not easy at all. Imagine.
The reason we have this conversation is because we seek reforms in Islam.
I seek reforms in Islam too. I'm just saying that it's going to be way more difficult than reforming Christianity was, or reforming Judaism was.
No, that's like you cannot speculate what happens in the future.
I'm not speculating. I'm making an observation, or rather making a judgment based on facts. That there is an essential hardening of its position when it comes to Islam as compared to Christianity.
You never will see a more reformed, a more relaxed format of the same religion.
Yeah, of course. Now look at Indian Muslims.
Yeah, but that's a period of how long?
No, the reformed or the relaxed format of Islam can be seen in India.
Yeah. And let's just make a quick overview. Just quickly compare these two religions, and then just make the case why, as you say, and I rather agree, that Islam might be a little bit more difficult to reform to the same extent as, for instance, Christianity.
No, I do. That's why I do believe there can be reform maybe.
Yeah. I'm just gonna say some.
There has to be reform for things to happen nicely in the future.
We do believe, but
I agree.
We believe also that it's going to be much more difficult.
Sure, I agree. I mean, I think first, common ground. I don't
think it will be much more difficult. You had different set of issues back then.
Let me set some common ground. I think we all think it can get better. Right? I mean, we all think.
Hope.
No, I think. I mean, it's. I find it very unlikely that it doesn't go through some level of improvement over time. Now, the issue I would say in which we differ is how much, till which point, and which elements of that particular religion makes it harder for that religion to reach the same, to follow the same path of reformation that, for instance, Christianity followed, and Judaism didn't get reformed. Really. Judaism is a little bit different, but I wanna highlight some commonality between Judaism and Islam that I think it's very illustrative, which is Islam is usually and rightly referred to as a system of how to have the proper life, right? It has clauses about what you should eat, how to settle legal matters. So, for example, inheritance. It has all sorts of issues about jurisdiction.
Even which leg to put in first while entering a room.
All sorts of things, to govern your whole life as a human being, to be a virtuous human being. Judaism, it's very much the same in that aspect. If you read the Old Testament, it's full of regulations also, and some of them are patently ridiculous, like these rules about not wearing clothes of mixed fabrics, or do not work on the Sabbath because the penalty for that is death, or all those kind of things. They are there too. And then you wonder, why is it the case that if both religions seem to be all-encompassing, how is it possible that one of them, every person, virtually every modern...
Are you going in the direction of thanking Hitler?
No, my God. No way. Every modern...
We're in Germany.
Oh, holy shit. That's illegal in Germany.
I don't know, because this is
edit this
out.
No modern Jew or Jewish community, it's... other than probably some Orthodox Jewish people living, I don't know, or in some enclaves of the United States, or I don't really know, don't really follow any of these commandments that are stipulated within Judaism.
There you have the answer. They don't follow it.
They just
they don't follow it, and that means they are not following parts of Judaism. That means they are not as Jewish as the Jewish person. So that is the only solution. You have to stop following certain things or everything.
But yeah, sure.
That is the reform. That is the only thing that can happen.
I just want to highlight the fact
but it had to go through some sense of brutality.
But Judaism didn't have a reform like Christianism.
Yeah. But there are different reasons for that. Judaism, like the place where the Jews came from, the remaining Jews, they were migrating to different societies, getting ingrained into other societies.
They didn't get ingrained.
They were very
always
insular.
Okay, fine.
They
were migrating to other societies at least.
Yeah.
They did remain insular.
You like the American Jews, you're saying they kind of lost their being Jew.
Point is,
that is partly because they migrated into different communities and modernity took place. And over a massive number of generations, now you feel that it is more like a cultural practice rather than a very...
No, there's some truth in that. There's some truth in that because...
Just a sec. He's saying that Jews modernized because they interacted with other communities.
I think over generations.
I don't think
so. How did they lose their religion?
No,
they did not lose their religion because of interacting with other communities. Maybe they lost it because they introspected. Jews are intelligent people. You are forgetting that.
It's true. It's true. There's something truth in that. I mean, I think there's something that it's. I think what is confounding this discussion now is that, Jews were mingling around in other cultures because they were kind of on the road since 2,000 years ago or something like that. They did remain insular in an ethnical sense, which is they pretty much just they didn't intermarry, right? They just married within, for the most part, with other Jewish people. And if you wanted to marry a Jewish woman or a Jewish man, you had to convert to Judaism and become part of the religion. So in that sense, there's some sense of insularity, mostly ethnical or genetic insularity. But it's also true that some aspects of the host culture have to transpire necessarily into their community. Because...
for example, take Jews in Germany. They spoke German. And they had many German customs which they still follow.
Periods of love and hate.
So let's say,
if you read the history of Jews in Germany, there are periods of absolutely there was moments of respect even.
So I think you would say, even if for the most part, like their genetic line remained more or less intact because they only intermarry, they eat among themselves. their cultural line did get some hybridization in different parts of the world by virtue of just living in, not in every sense, because they did maintain certain traditions. Jewish people in New York still do bar mitzvah or things like that. I mean, those things have been maintained, but
then saying, as he said, that because of this cultural mix, they got over their orthodoxy, is, as you would like to put it, probably post hoc. Yeah, that is quintessentially post hoc. I
would agree that.
Yeah, but even the argument that you cannot see a reform happening in Islam based on what you have seen from before, that's also a post hoc argument.
No, I'm not saying based on what I've seen from before, but that is not post hoc. That is completely.
Why is harder in Islam?
No, it's not. First of all, it is not a post hoc argument. It is a posteriori argument, because you have the evidence, and then you are saying, okay, this is the evidence. 1,400 years, ever since its inception, this has been overwhelmingly, nearly 100% the narrative. So that is not a post hoc argumentation, that is not a priori, that is a posteriori.
The narrative is the same, but the level of brutality has completely subsided.
It has gone up and down, but the orthodoxy has remained the same. Things have changed because the people changed, because people did not consider Islam that seriously. They did not take it that seriously at points. But the text itself says certain things which have this very strong capacity to get a society to pull it back to the Stone Age from wherever in the modernity it is. Take Iran, for example. So that is the problem. That, okay, you might say that for now things are feeling okay.
So you have a problem with all Abrahamic religion then, because in principle, if you just interpret the Bible, then
I think what he's saying,
you can get back to the Stone Age with that as well.
I think what he's saying is that this text, particularly the Quran, has within itself the potential at any given moment, if you it's sufficiently enough.
It is there to exploit every opportunity to bring itself
always
back.
Be used.
But it is just staying there. It just needs any
piece of literature which you buy into completely is going to do that.
Now again.
And again, when I was talking about Islam being the most modern of the youngest of the religion, let's not say modern of the religion.
That's a bit misleading.
So it also entered a territory which was already bought into an idea of other, like Christianity or Judaism. So
no, it didn't actually. Because
again, I will make another post hoc argument that it could be that the reason why it had to be aggressive is to infiltrate these boundaries and get into these cracks.
Not exactly. Islam cohabited a space, that is Mecca, with pagans, as they are called in the West. It was not Christianity or Judaism.
No, but they spread into territories which was Christian or...
Yeah, but then when it went to Medina, that's when there were some Jews involved in the thing. But this is the thing you have to understand, that just because there are competing forces.
No, I'm not defending Islam with respect to that. I'm just saying that it is a lot more aggressive text, aggressive in the sense that things are written down in bolder letters.
And
for that
there is
reason.
finality. And yes, for that reason, completely I am with you. And that is why I contest that it is even less susceptible to reform.
It potentially can be, or it probably has even been in history much more harmful.
What you would wish to see with Islam is something very akin to what happened to Judaism. Again, because I highlight the point of how similar they are in the sense of how all-inclusive they are. And in Judaism, that has been abandoned for the most part. And in Islam, obviously, it has not. And that's the kind of reformation, that's the kind of evolution that you would want to see in Islam. But why? You ask, why is that?
Because
their historical circumstances. Yeah, but their historical circumstances have been very different. Islam, or a large fraction. Again, when I say Muslims, it's not constant caveat. Not everyone. Blah blah blah. Some, many fraction of Muslims
A substantial number.
Yeah, but there's Islam went through a period of glory. Islam had at some point.
No, it was not. No, it did not.
Militaristically speaking, in terms of, I'm not in terms of liberalism,
literature,
enlightenment.
Yeah.
No, not in that sense. In sense of as an empire, right? At some point, they were the domains of Islam were the largest in the world, and it had a very powerful civilization, culturally and militaristically speaking. And they lost that. They lost that place of prominence in the world status, in the competition between different civilizations. Jews were never at the pinnacle of. They never had an empire. They were never a group of people that even had a state until now. Israel.
No, but before. I mean,
so there's no sense of frustration. There's no sense of we were at the top of the world, and it was taken away from us.
Firstly, there is a sense of there is grounds to be a sense of frustration within the Jews because they were very powerful before Christ. Yeah,
very
before pre-Christianity.
It's very relative, right? When you say very, you're not talking. It's a different league compared to the Islamic civilization.
Before Christ,
absolutely,
Judaism was only in the Middle East.
Yeah, but it was the predominant force there. Consider how big Israel was back then. And how big it is now, and
but
no one has suffered more than Jews.
But that's a little bit of a gross exaggeration. When you talk about the golden age of Islam, you're talking scales of Rome, scales of the Persian
Don't call it the golden age. Yeah, call it the pinnacle of their military power, if you want, because golden age has many different connotations.
I'm not the golden age in India.
To clarify, I'm not talking in terms of how close they come to enlightenment values or anything like that. I'm talking about empires, empire-wise, dominions, power. The Jewish civilization, if you even, I haven't even encountered that term ever. Was in a completely different league. Whatever amount of power they held in the Middle East was mostly provincial, and they never held an empire that you would call nowadays the Jewish empire.
Yeah.
The Muslims did, at the same scale and the same degree as the Romans did, or as the Persians did, more or less. It's comparable.
Yeah.
So at some point, what I'm trying to say is at some point, they were at the top of their game. And not only regionally speaking, but like in a global scale.
Yeah.
And then that was taken away from them, also through military action for the most part. There was this
the post-Ottoman
counter-attack
the
from
fall of the Ottoman Empire.
Christendom. And that didn't happen to the Jews. They don't, I would say, they don't carry that sense of historical frustration, if you want to call it like that.
But then again, this is the thing. This is nationalism. Don't you agree? Harking back to a glorious
pan-Arabism or something like that.
That is nationalism. It is religious nationalism, and
pan-Arabism.
Because it's not national. It doesn't correspond to national borders. Let's say.
No, I mean
I'm the current national borders.
Let me define nationalism. Nationalism is it just doesn't have to be.
That's good.
It just doesn't have to be a nation as defined by the UN. Yeah, it doesn't have to be nationalism only of the 178 countries of the UN. Yeah, that is only nationalism can be the same feeling for an ideology. That is still called nationalism.
We have a tendency to overextend terms.
It's not. It is. Come on, just look at the definition of nationalism.
Is it?
Yeah, religious nationalism is a thing.
So
religious chauvinism.
Nationalism.
Religious nationalism.
Yeah. Nationalism.
So how is it different from religion? Like this could encompass religion entirely.
Religious
just being proud of your religion for being that, or thinking that your religion is better than the other.
So you're saying if you're proud of your religion, so you will be giving all the blame to this one word, nationalism.
No, what I'm saying, what is nationalism? Believing that you are better than the other one and that you have precedence over the other.
In virtue of your country and your nation.
In virtue of anything. It started.
This is how I extended it. Yeah.
That can be.
You are not understanding that nationalism.
But that's a terminology.
Is now an umbrella concept. It has always been an umbrella concept. Read Orwell's essay on nationalism. Yeah. Just because it has nation in it doesn't mean you have to limit it to nation. You have to understand what it is. It is putting X that you have, be it a nation or an idea or a religion.
So Christianity in any part of the world, if you differentiate with respect to Christianity, it will be religious.
If you say that I am a Christian, therefore I have more rights, or
differentiating between us and them with respect to religion. That is nationalism.
Then you would be
That
a
is
Christian
nationalism.
nationalist.
That is nationalism. Differentiating between you and the other, saying that you have more right than the other because of X thing is X nationalism. Religious nationalism or just nationalism.
It's just a definition, fine. It's the way we understand national. I put religion, nationalism as two different things.
Did you ever listen to the podcast between Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson about what is true?
Okay.
I'll try to listen to it, but I cannot tolerate Jordan Peterson.
That Jordan Peterson starts talking about the definition of truth, that is Darwinian truth, and it all gets bogged down from there because his definition seems to be just operationally very complicated and not.
But this is not operationally complicated.
Okay, I'm just gonna say, I'm skeptical about the functionality of that definition of nationalism because, well, first of all, I cannot say much because I've never encountered that rather expansive definition, and I'm not sure how well it would fare in.
Just because it is expansive doesn't mean that it is not pointed. It is a very clear definition. Nationalism
it's what I would call tribalism.
It's what I would call chauvinism.
Tribalism
This
is
distinction of us versus them, that is nationalism.
But it seems to me like that you can exchange that for
I will use a different word.
For instance, something like Christian supremacist or ex-supremacist, whatever supremacist, and that I think it's a better. Well, it's a matter of language, but
it seems semantics. It's also used nationalism because when you say that such thing is nationalism, then you exactly understand what you're talking about, because nationalism has a very clear definition: putting your nation above the others and putting the rights of your nation above the other. Now, this nation can be a geographical entity or it can be a religious entity. You belong to the nation of Israel.
Semantics.
You belong to the nation of Islam, nation of Hinduism.
Okay.
The nation of Manchester United.
If all the conversants agree on the definition, then you can have a discussion about it. Let's say that's okay.
So what were you talking about?
I just want to point something that made me happy in what you just said, which is you cannot tolerate Jordan Peterson. But probably that's at some point probably we can talk about that character.
Should we
take a pause or what?
No, I think we can wrap this up now here. I think we covered part of what we said.
But there's still a lot more to go on, and I would say that we take a pause and we continue.
Do we promise?
Yes, this time we promise, yes.
Okay, we promise to take a pause and continue. So thank you for being here, for joining us in this episode, Till the Bottom, and see you next time.
Cheers.
But in the name of fairness with our past guest, who only got a maximum of 2 episodes each, we have decided to release the third part of this conversation as an audio-only format episode. But don't worry, we will let you know when it is dropping down through our website, channel, and other social media platforms. Stay tuned, because it is a good one. If you like what we do, please help us continue doing it simply by subscribing to our YouTube channel, following us on Twitter, liking us on Facebook, visiting our website tillthebottom.com, or spreading the voice. All the links are provided in the description. Thank you for listening, and until the next time.